Hey folks, welcome to Bear Mountain today. We are in the greenhouse again. This is episode 3 of a 3-part series on soil blocking. What we're going to be talking about today is fertilizing and irrigating. How do we keep the blocks moist, and when do we fertilize, how do we fertilize, and what do we use? All those kinds of good things. And how do we irrigate? We're going to go through all those details, so let's do it.
Hi! I'm going to talk today a little bit about how I irrigate our mini blocks and our plug trays or larger soil blocks. So the first thing that lots of people ask a question about is how do I water my mini blocks? And here I have a tray of mini blocks. These are dianthus that I just seeded a couple of days ago. And the first thing was that when we make our soil blocks, they're nice and moist. And once I seed them, what I do to keep that moisture in is the following. Solid trays. We use those, especially when we're going to go into our house. They will hold the water. It won't spill all over my carpet and stuff. But if you're familiar with these points right here always get a hole in them. And so what we discovered is they have this type of weave bottom tray that this tray fits nicely in it. This bottom tray is very rigid. You can hit the corners all day long and it does not damage the fragile inner solid tray. This is a huge investment to get. It's so good. We bought these and we've been using these with our solid trays for 4 or 5 years with no damage. So this is really worth getting if you're doing any kind of seeding and you're using this solid bottom tray. So once I have those two, then the next thing that I add is a capillary mat. And here is a cut of the capillary mat that we purchased. It comes in a 100-foot roll from Farm Tech, right?
Right.
And we cut it to the size of the tray. And what this is it's capillary system. It gets wet and it draws, the soil blocks draw the moisture, the water up through the root system via this. What this buys us is time, precious time, so that we don't have to keep running back and forth to the greenhouse to make sure that our seedlings have not dried out. We use this on all of our mini blocks, both in the house and out here, to keep them moist and growing on. So it fits perfectly inside here. And the next thing then, when I know that I need to water my seedlings, what I do is I get, you gonna be able to hand it to me?
We may have to edit this part out. Be sure it's adjusted correctly.
Yeah, I don't want it hosing everything in here. What I do is I just apply a little bit of moisture all the way around so I can see that the mat is nice and moist. After many years of knowing how much it will take to water it, you got to experiment. But as you can see, there's plenty of water in here. I'm just making sure that all corners of the mat are moist. And then I take my tray and I put it in. Okay, so the water, I've got the water on the mat, and what I do now is I just tip it. So as you can see, the water is pooling around the edges. And why I do this is I just want to make sure that those corner blocks have all got a little bit of moisture. Because what's going to happen is the capillary function of all of this is going to draw all the water into the blocks, just enough water that they need. You can start to see that some of the roots are coming out of the bottom, and that's what's helped pulling all of this up. So when I've done what I think is all the water that it needs, I don't try and dump this. I dump the excess out of here into the sink. Not taking the whole tray. So I don't lose anybody moving or shifting or any of that kind of thing.
Okay, so how do you tell when the block itself is adequately moist? What are the things you're looking for on the top of the block?
Well, as you can see, if you can get in really close right now, you can see that the blocks are glistening. That means that from the bottom, they pulled up all the water they need, and they're starting to glisten in the sunlight.
Right, I see that.
So that's how I know that they're plenty ready. Water.
And they change color too.
They change color.
They become
dark.
dark.
They go from something that's really light to something that's dark. Okay, so when everything is seeded, I use a humidity dome to cover them. This is a really good investment you want to make. You can use plastic, but this works the best in terms of it allows you some flexibility. So when it's all seeded and it's been misted, the soil blocks were moist to start with, we put the humidity dome on it, and I do not water again until I see germination. And there is actually germination just beginning on this. Little tiny seedlings are starting to just barely show. So I will take the humidity dome and I will push it off a little bit. So I have airflow here and I have airflow in the back. I will then put it back on, say in the evening, just to keep them nice and warm and moving forward. But I don't want it sealed up, because there's a very good chance when little seedlings are starting that you could get damping off, which means a healthy seedling comes up and then just fails and goes down. I want to keep just enough moisture and humidity in here, but not enough to start that problem. So this allows me the flexibility to move it forward and back. Over here, I have my sunflowers, and as you can see, I have them slightly propped because if you look back there, I have my sunflowers in 6-packs. Don't use mini blocks on these. Have just begun to germinate. So during the day, I will give them a little more air. And even on this one here, I got some movement. So I'll prop those guys up. It's nice and warm in here in the greenhouse, and it's going to be a nice sunny day. And so we want to, don't want to have any problems with them. But once again, these guys are on a heat mat, and at night I will pull them back down because we're still having really low temperatures at night. So I think that covers everything. Can you think of anything more than I water the 6-packs overhead with a hand wand because they won't reach the capillary mat. But all our mini blocks are used with the capillary mat to water and to fertilize, which is the next part of the questions everybody said. What do you use for fertilization? How do you do it? And Tony's going to talk to you about some of the various fertilizers that we use.
Okay, fertilization. The principle of what we do is we just want to give these guys enough nutrition to get them onto the transplant stage in the ground. We want to keep them healthy. We want to kind of get them, to be as sturdy, stocky as possible with good color. And so what we're looking for when we use a fertilizer is we're looking for a balance of something that would give us a relatively low nitrogen, say like a 2 to 3% range, with phosphorus kind of in that same zone, and with a fairly low potassium level as well. So we don't want to overstimulate these guys, but we want to give them a kind of a constant flow of nutrition. So once our mini blocks are germinated and they're up with the true cotyledon leaves, that would typically be a point where we would apply our first fertilization. And it would probably almost be the only fertilization, because sometimes, in some cases, these plants grow so fast that we move them out of the mini block phase into a transplant. And we'll use the same type of fertilization on a weekly basis once they go into the transplant of the 6-pack. The idea on it is that we're not going to be growing these things on so long in any container, whether it's in the mini block or whether it's in the 6-pack, that the root systems become so constrained that they can't get adequate nutrition, or that the plants are stressed. So what we're trying to do here is just kind of keep it, I guess maybe you'd call it the law of the minimum. We're just trying to keep enough fertility going to it. Okay, so we're looking for fertility that's kind of on the low end of being hot, if you want to call it that. Now, when we first started, we used purchased inputs. So as an example, we would use a fish hydroslate, or fish emulsion, which is not as quite a high quality as a hydroslate. But you can see the numbers on it are 2.3. So I mean, we're fairly low. We also tended to, if needed be, add a little bit of, these would be seaweed extract. It's basically powdered dehydrated seaweed. It's derived from kelp, and it's got a very low nitrogen level, but it has a fairly high potassium level. So we would use very little of this. So as an example, we would dilute the fish emulsion to about 1 to 128 or so, which is the directions on the fish emulsion, and then we would use, maybe in a gallon, a half a teaspoon of the sea kelp. And so that gave us not just potassium, but the sea kelp also has quite a few minerals from the sea itself. So it provides a fair amount of micronutrients. That's a good basic blend, and then diluted, like I said, into the watering, and that's what we used for years, and it works really well, but it's also very expensive. You can buy, some cases there are companies that will blend all this stuff together for you. Neptune's Harvest, I think, is one of them that does that. But it's an expensive way to go in terms of how much you get in the concentrate and how many gallons of stuff it makes over the course of a season. So it's a choice to make. And what we decided to do also too is move away from things that were purchased inputs and try to find things on the farm that would give us an equivalent in terms of nutritional balance and nutrients that would make the plants do well. So we moved to worm castings, our own worm castings, about a year or so ago, and now we use predominantly a worm casting tea. We don't know, I can't give you the exact nutrient density of this, because it depends on what you fed the worms over the time. But in general, this was fed with household food trimmings that were vegetable matter, and a steady source of carbon, etc., to help. So this has a fair amount of all kinds of nutrients in it. Worm castings in general, you can Google it. It has a fairly low nitrogen level, but it has a lot of micronutrients, and it has a low potassium and a low phosphorus level in it too. But again, it can greatly be influenced by what you feed your worms. But in a general sense, it's not as scientific as saying, okay, exactly, I know what I got in here. But what we found was, by taking in a gallon of water basically about 4 tablespoons of this worm casting and making a extract tea out of it, that it performed just as well as the fish hydroslate. In addition, once we move these things on to transplant stage, we will continue to use some of the worm tea, but we also use our grass liquid fertilizer, which we did a video on about 2 or 3 weeks ago on how we make that, and that provides a lot of basic bionutrients. In that grass liquid fertilizer, we tend to not use it unless it's at least 3 months old. So it's had a very long period to basically percolate, and the minerals and things that the grass has accumulated are then in a bioavailable form for our transplants. And we'll use that at a dilution of 1 to 200. So if we need the nitrogen, if it looks like we're weak on nitrogen, we may go back and use some of the fish hydroslate. But at this point, what we have found was between the worm castings and the Jadam liquid fertilizer, that we've basically got the equivalent of the impact of the purchased sea kelp and that. So when we fertilize, if you're doing a mini block, Denise explained to you about how we water using the solid tray system. And what we'll do is, instead of having a capillary mat in it when we're going to fertilize and water, you could leave the capillary mat in, but we tend not to do that. We're going to put, instead of just a watering solution in this, we're going to put the fertilizer solution in it, and then we'll let the mini blocks absorb up to that point where they're glistening and they've been fertilized at that point. Any excess, so we can do, in one of these trays, we can do mini trays of mini blocks and get them fertilized. It doesn't take long. Typically they sit in one of these trays for a couple, 3 or 4 minutes. If they're that long, and they're well hydrated and fertilized. And that's simply all we do to it. Any excess, when we're finished, we'll just go feed our rose plants with it. Works out. When we're talking about 6-packs, that is going to be an overhead watering thing. And so what we tend to do is we use a watering can that kind of will, we can put the fertilizer solution into it, and we'll overhead water the actual 6-pack itself until we see the moisture begin to drip down through the bottom of the 6-pack itself. That way we know the root system has been pretty well fertilized. The sequence on our transplants is we'll fertilize these guys. Usually it works out to be about once every 10 days. So it's not necessarily every watering, but we're trying to hit these guys on a 7 to 10 day, but mostly it tends to run around 10 days to fertilization. We also pay attention to the plant itself. If the plants look like they're just not getting what they need, we may make an adjustment. In some cases, like I said, if we need to boost more nitrogen, we would then maybe go back to using some of the fish hydroslate, because obviously we still own some of this, but we would use significantly less of it. And actually, for this year, we have not had to use it at all. And it's actually, using our own inputs has saved us a lot of money. And it's always nice to know that you can close the loop, in a sense, and that you can generate that fertility yourself on your own farm.
Can you over fertilize?
Is it with anything? Yeah, you could apply too much of it, and
how would you
over
know?
time, well, what'll happen is the plants will begin to develop problems in terms of their coloring may change, or they may look not necessarily you won't get fertilizer burn, but more likely what you'll end up with is salt accumulations in it, because all these things being ocean based on that end, they do have some sodium in them, and some other things that would be classified from a chemistry standpoint as a salt, which would affect the root's abilities to absorb things. It kind of creates a difficult situation for the plant. Not so much with the worm castings. We haven't, it's not saying that there isn't sodium in this too, because household food could have sodium in it. All things typically have some sodium in it. But you would have to use a lot of this worm casting tea, I think, to get to the point where it would start to negatively affect the plants. More likely what'll happen more than anything else is plants just won't absorb anymore, and it's kind of wasted. So you could over apply in a sense, but not get the benefit of the growth from the plant any more than you would if you applied it, in a moderate way. So you kind of got to think of it that way. Is you may just be wasting your resource by applying it too much.
I think that was the last question was too much fertilizer.
Yeah, you definitely can get problems with chemical-based fertilizers.
Right.
You know, if you're using a pretty hot thing like a Miracle Grow or something like that, yeah, you can get some toxicity to the plants.
So you should just really follow the instructions.
Right. Follow the instructions, and they'll usually tell you, on these things, how often to apply and, what the dilution rate should be for a container or something of that nature. So, yeah, pay attention to that. It's always better to go with a little and observe the plant's reaction
than to go big.
Yeah, and if you get the appropriate reaction with a little, then you're good.
Don't go a little is good and a lot might be better. It's just not necessarily true.
Right. Right.
You're nudging your plants. You're not pushing and shoving.
Yeah. Pushing an outcome can sometimes lead to a bad outcome.
Right.
Definitely.
So I think that's everything. I think over the series of 3, we've covered all the questions.
Hopefully. And if
we're always welcoming more questions.
Yeah, I've been a little backed up because of the weather and trying to get spring things done. So I apologize for not getting back as timely as I should, but I will definitely be getting back.
We also are having a little problems with our internet connections, so things are delayed.
Yeah, sometimes it takes a little longer to load things up, or anyway, those are all technical problems that
we'll just keep working on.
No one needs to know except us.
We're working on them.
But we're working on these kinds of things, and I just want to say to folks, thank you for, if you did watch all 3 of these things, be sure to check out the first 2 installments of this series. It there's hopefully some continuity there, and as always, questions are welcome, and I appreciate your time for watching these things.
Right. And
so stay safe out there.
Yep.
Enjoy spring because it's definitely coming.
It's starting.
And thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.